So I think we were gonna get started with some questions, right? So just in case for anyone else who's watching who doesn't know me, I'm Dr. Ranade, the Medical Officer of Health for the County of Lambton and Lambton Public Health, and the purpose of this conversation is just to help answer some questions about the vaccines, right? For the COVID vaccines.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So Natalie, I think you might have some. Is that right?
Yes. What would be the difference between the Pfizer and the Moderna? I've had the Pfizer myself and had both vaccines. And for myself personally, I've had no side effects at all, except a bit of a sore arm each time. But that was just my experience from Pfizer.
Yeah.
The majority of people in the community have had Moderna. So what's the difference between the two?
Very little, actually. So they're made by different companies. So it's like, you might have different companies that make the same kind of medication, but it's kind of like that. So different companies are making different vaccines, but these two vaccines use very much the same, they work in very much the same way. So there's very little difference between the two. For us, the difference is that they both need to be frozen, but they need to be kept at slightly different temperatures. And when you're drawing them up in order to use them, it's just a slightly different process. But for people who are getting it, there's really very little difference between one or the other.
Okay, yeah, because I've heard from different people in the community that have had some mild side effects from especially the second dose of the Moderna.
Mm-hmm.
My sister had a headache, some chills, but it was only for a day.
Mm-hmm.
So she was down for a day and took the day off. So that was from the Moderna. And so but I think everybody's different, right?
Yeah, everybody's different. There's no way of knowing for sure whether you're going to be a person who has a mild reaction or a severe reaction to a vaccine. We know the severe reactions are rare, but here's what we know about Pfizer and Moderna, that reactions like you said, the headache or arm pain, things like that, are more common with the second dose than with the first dose.
Yes.
And they're more common in people who are younger than older. So much more common in people under 65 to have a reaction than over 65, mm-hmm. and more common with dose number 2 than dose number 1.
Would you say that those side effects would be showing people that the vaccine is actually working and doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Sometimes, yes, right? So I would say lots of times when you get a vaccine, you could get a little bit of soreness at the place where you get the shot. You could get a little bit of arm pain. That doesn't necessarily mean that the vaccine is working. That's just your body reacting to something. It could react the same way to any kind of shot. Like if they just gave you like a salt water shot or a shot of a different vaccine, it would just be your body reacting. But if you're getting like a headache, if you're getting you just feel like you're just not quite yourself, that's part of your body saying, wait, something's going on here, and now I have to build a response to it, just the way I would if I was getting a cold or a flu or one of those other kinds of infections, right?
Yeah, my niece actually, she got what was called COVID arm, where it got swollen after her second vaccine, and it was actually pretty warm on mm-hmm. the site, and it swelled right up. But she looked it up because she was concerned because she's type 1 diabetic, mm-hmm. and was seeing that that's just one of the side effects, and that it was COVID arm. So
it can be. So you can get a bit of swelling there too, and you're right. It gets swollen and a bit warm, and then you put some ice on it for a while, and usually that goes down after a couple of hours.
I was concerned about her, and she, being like I said, high risk. I think she's okay now. That was a couple of weeks ago, and she had got the Pfizer, I believe, with the same time I did. Okay, for the next question, what will the vaccine protect against the new variants?
It's a good question. So for the most part, we think yes. There's some evidence that one of the variants, it's either the Brazil one or the South Africa one, is there's a little bit less protection against that. But I think in general, the thinking is that the vaccine can effectively prevent against the variants, but not prevent the variants, but it protects against the variants, right? There's a couple of things we don't know though, right? We don't know how long that protection lasts. with the vaccine. We think it's, at least a year, probably more. We don't know. But the other thing that we don't know is, will the vaccine need to be modified later to account for these different variants? And the manufacturers are telling us that it can be. So just the way you have flu shots that are different every year because they include different kinds of strains of the vaccine, similarly, over time, we might need to change the vaccine to account for these different variants. But right now, I think the thinking is, the vaccine is much better than not having any protection. Right. And the vaccine gives you good protection against most of the strains, if not all of them.
Yeah, I can see my own opinion that in the future that we may have to every fall get a booster like we do, like our vaccine for the flu. I can see that happening now with COVID, like you said, with the variants that are out there, of having a booster shot once a year, because we really don't know how long that this vaccination, the 2 vaccinations that we got, are going to last, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. So it may be true that over time we figure out that people do need some kind of booster, and then we'd have to figure out what's the right time for it. Like, I don't know that we'll get to the place where you have to get one every year, so flu, it's every year, but things like tetanus, it's like every 10 years. And so it might be something in between that, where actually it's sort of like every 5 years you need something, right? Well, we just don't have enough experience with the disease because it's new.
Yeah, and I had seen some, in some cases on social media about that there has been very little flu this past season because of probably all the prevention that we have been doing with masks and hand sanitizing and all of that.
Yeah, and staying away from people when you're ill and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, my next question is, have there been any studies with the vaccine in children?
So there are studies right now. So when they first went for the application for the vaccines to be approved, there were no studies involving children. Pfizer is now doing a study from the 12 to 16-year-old group, and Moderna is doing a study from, I think, 6 months up to 11 years. So as the data comes in from those studies, then Health Canada will look at it and make a decision about whether or not we can use those vaccines in those age groups.
Would probably be good to be sooner than later with all the cases in the schools right now, where there seems to be that's where the outbreaks are, and especially the younger ones.
At the province, there are more cases in schools, but we haven't seen a lot of really big outbreaks in schools. We've seen a few, but in general, kids under 10 don't seem to transmit COVID the same way as kids over 10, which is why we haven't really seen a lot of daycare and childcare related outbreaks either. So
yeah, I have a 12-year-old grandson who's in one of the Catholic schools in Sarnia, and I haven't heard of any. He hasn't mentioned anything about his school, of anybody in his school, because of getting affected by COVID. But I have seen that there has been some, I think, more of the high schools.
Right. So, high schools are kids over 10, and they do seem to transmit more like adults than kids under 10. And kids under 10 seem to not transmit very effectively, and we're not sure why. But
okay, my next question is, what am I putting into my body, and what are all those ingredients in the vaccine?
Yeah, good question. So in principle, the vaccine has very few ingredients, actually. So the first thing is that they know that lots of people are allergic to things like eggs or latex or whatever. So they've been careful to not have those components in the vaccine, right? But now what you think about is the vaccine has maybe 2 or 3 basic kinds of components. One is the thing that actually works, which is the mRNA that goes into your body and gets your body to make the little protein that is on coronavirus on the outside of it, so that your body can make a response to that, right? Around that, there's a little bit of fat, because fat helps the mRNA get inside your body. And there's water, because you need it to be held up in something. And then there's a few little things, a few additional substances that they put in, which are called stabilizers. So what they do is they help the suspension or the solution be stable, so that the thing inside it isn't going to move around too much or get affected by the environment. So it's interesting, because when I look at those things, there really aren't a lot of components to these vaccines. So they've tried to be very minimal about what they put in them. and it's interesting. So all of that is publicly available. So that's important, right? People who want to look that up can go onto like Health Canada's website and see what's called a product monograph for Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And it specifies exactly what's in each vaccine.
I think that the fear in some people who are still reluctant about getting the vaccine are because of that, because the vaccine was developed fairly quickly, that they're still unsure of like long-term effects from the vaccine, I think.
So like, I think that this is very fast. To have vaccines like this is quite fast, right? But we know the technology to build vaccines exists. So you take that, and then we took the information, not me, but I mean the people who are making it, took the information about the disease itself to then help build this vaccine. So all of the pieces were in place to do it quickly, but it's been really impressive that it's gotten done so fast, I think.
Okay, my next question. How do you know it's safe, vaccine?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So in order for a vaccine to be given approval by Health Canada or any of the other country kind of regulatory things, they have to look at all of the studies that have been done for the vaccines. So these vaccines, like Pfizer and Moderna, have gone through clinical trials in people where they've been given to 30,000 people or more, depending on the trial, right? And in those trials, you look at what happens to the groups that were given vaccine and the groups that were not given vaccine, or were given, something that is an injection but has no vaccine in it, or something like that, right? To see what side effects do people have. And so based on that, they can say that there have been no, severe side effects or that kind of thing from those studies, right? Now, when you take it out from 30,000 people to hundreds of thousands or millions of people, you're always going to pick up some additional signals. You're going to say, oh, maybe this thing happened and we're not sure if it's related to the vaccine. But in general, because it's been tried on like 30, 40, 50,000 people in total, we have a pretty good sense of what the safety profile of it is.
And it would have been the trials would have been done with a different variety of different peoples from different ethnic groups, cultural or whatever, just so that you had like an idea just for like even with high risk people as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So with respect to people who might be at risk because of different medical conditions, that was definitely covered. Okay, so in Pfizer and Moderna trials, they had a large number of people in those trials who had at least like one or more chronic diseases. Okay, what's usually less covered is racial and ethnic diversity in these trials, right? And so what I would say is that there was a larger than usual proportion of racial diversity in the trials for Pfizer and Moderna, but probably not like as broad as it could have been, right? But now that we're getting much more real life experience with it, it's actually being given in so many different countries now that we are getting more data from different racial populations and ethnic groups and things like that, and still seeing a very similar safety profile, which is good.
My opinion about the whole vaccine for myself, and I was, happy to get the vaccines and now be fully protected by both vaccines, is that I would still prefer, because we've been vaccinated for everything since we were born, since we were babies, that I would prefer to go through whatever inconvenience of a sore arm or whatever for a day, than to get the COVID, because of it's so unpredictable and affects everybody differently.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. That's exactly right? Because if you were to get COVID, you don't really know how it's going to impact you. You could have very mild disease and hardly know it, or you could have very severe disease. Whereas with this, you're taking a small risk of a like a moderate or mild side effect compared to the much larger risk of what happens if you might get COVID.
Yeah, and then it seems to be like a hit and miss thing. Like I know the majority of people who have had COVID in Sarnia Lambton are recovering, but there's still that unpredictability about the long-term effects with some people who have had COVID. And I do not, I'm so glad that I hope I will never have to experience that. So, okay, my next question is, what if I have a reaction from the vaccine?
So most of the reactions, right, are mild. So if you do get a headache after a vaccine and you want to take something for that you're used to taking, like a Tylenol or something, that's reasonable, right? Some of the reactions are local, like so you just need a bit of ice on it if it's swollen or that kind of thing. If you have a more severe reaction, like if it's something where you, again, this is very rare, but if you have an allergic reaction, so maybe you didn't know that you had an allergy to one of the components in the vaccine, which is rare, but you would think, if you're starting to get hives or you're flushed or you have difficulty breathing, you're short of breath, you feel like your throat is closing, things like that, you need to seek medical attention right away. Right? But for the most part, the other side effects that people have, you might feel tired for a day, like those kinds of things, you can just manage them on your own.
Yeah, I had also heard, because there is so much speculation about the vaccine, is that one of the things I had heard early on when the vaccine was first became available was that, is that it's working when you are getting all these side effects, and that's just your body, it's being introduced to something foreign, and that it's helping to build your immune system against the COVID. But I had heard that, and to get like a headache or any pain to get from, like, especially the second vaccine, to try to tough it out because it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Like, instead of trying to, like, I didn't have any side effects, but to try to, if you can, not take the Tylenol, because that's fighting against it.
Oh, yeah.
So is that a myth?
It's a myth, yeah. I mean, if you have a headache or something after a shot, and you need to take something for that or do what you would normally do for it, you just go ahead and do that, right?
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with that. The one thing that we ask people not to do is take a painkiller before they have the vaccine, because that way you wouldn't actually know afterwards if you were experiencing something or not, right? So that's all we say: take it if you need it, but take it afterwards, so that if you have the symptom and you need the thing, you take it.
Yeah. But only if you are experiencing any kind of side effects like that.
Exactly.
Not just to go home and say, well, I might get this and I'm going to take a Tylenol.
No, exactly. That's right. So if you have the symptom and you need it, then take it for that, and that's no problem.
Okay. Why does the ambulance need to be there? Like, we've had the EMS people with us every week, and I've appreciated them. I am in the recovery room with people when they come, and have to do their 15-minute wait time after their vaccine. And I've appreciated having the EMS people there.
Yeah, it's great that we have EMS, I think, as a precaution. That's really what they're there for. So if you were just getting this vaccine in a regular clinic and maybe you were doing 10 a day, the chances that anything would happen would be so low that you wouldn't necessarily need to have support right there, right? But when you start increasing the number of vaccines that you do, even though it's a really rare possibility, it becomes a more possible event the more and more and more vaccines you give in one place. So for that reason, we want to make sure that if anybody has a reaction in that 15 or 30 minute window, that they're quickly transported to the hospital, right? But we have pretty good response times here, and over time, like, there are some clinics that we do in very small locations with small groups of people where you don't really necessarily need that. But in large clinics where you're doing lots and lots of people at a time, it's good to have that backup, that that people could be transported quickly for help if they need it, but also that the remaining immunizations could continue. Because otherwise, if you only have 2 people and they're over there responding to something, then they can't be immunizing, right? Yeah. So,
yeah, I think that since I've been doing the, helping with the clinics since we started, and my observation with EMS being there is that I think it's kind of it gives people a peace of mind that in case there is something or any questions they may have or may be experienced, and after they've had their vaccine, then the person is there to answer any questions that they may have and to monitor them if they need it. Mm-hmm. So that really helps in our community. Okay, will it give me COVID? And I've heard this.
Yeah. So no, the vaccines cannot give you COVID because they don't contain, the full virus. They don't contain the full anything. They don't have the ability to infect you or to let you infect other people. They're just giving you a little. They're giving your body the way to make a little piece of the virus that your body can then respond to. So there's although you might feel afterwards a little bit like you might be getting a cold, or it's a similar way your body responds, but it's not giving you the disease itself.
Some people have that idea even about the flu shot.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who have had a bad reaction for whatever reason or got sick and had a really bad flu after they've had a flu shot. I myself have never had the flu and I get the flu shot every year,
Mm-hmm.
but trying to convince those who had a bad reaction or got sick immediately after they got their flu shot, I think has deterred them from, future vaccines. But
Yeah.
that I think,
Certainly with this one, I would say it's really important because of what we know that COVID's been doing around the world.
right,
So
right, and
yeah.
especially with the variants making it that much more contagious,
Mm-hmm.
and because the variants are fairly new, from COVID, like we don't know exactly what they're capable of really doing. Like I know I've heard that it makes it more contagious than the original COVID-19, but I feel so fortunate to be fully vaccinated at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why do vaccines make you feel sick like the flu shot? Seems like we're kind of getting repetitious here.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, it's they don't do that for everyone, right? So some people will feel almost nothing afterwards, and other people will feel like they're a little bit under the weather, as if they're maybe like about to get a cold or that kind of thing. And it's because your body is responding in a way that says, something I have something here that's not me, and I have to respond the way I would in case your body were getting a cold, in case your body were getting a flu or another infection, right? So it's just that your body has very few ways to respond to it, and one of them is doing those things, giving you a headache, giving you a temperature, for example, making you feel tired, things like that.
Do you think that that may also be an indication of how good your whole immune system is at that point? Where you might not know that maybe you were on the verge of becoming sick with a cold or a flu or something, and then you take something and then it seems to aggravate it?
Hard to say. We don't know, right? Because just because you felt that way after the vaccine doesn't mean necessarily that your response was stronger. There are people who feel nothing after the vaccine who mount a very reasonable response to it, right? So yeah, it's hard to say.
Okay. I don't like hearing that people are blaming, like a flu shot or that they got sick after having a vaccine for something.
Oh,
That's not the case, but sometimes it's hard to change people's thinking that way. Okay, why are First Nations people getting it first? Are we guinea pigs for an experimental vaccine?
that's a good question, right? Like I think it's bound up in a lot of history, a lot of historical things that are unfair and that shouldn't have happened, right?
Yeah.
So here's what I would say about that. I think that First Nations people are getting it first probably for two reasons. I think the first reason is that if you think about other kinds of infectious diseases like TB, we know that on-reserve First Nations populations are at greater risk. So there's a risk component to it, which is, I think, one of the pieces. And I think the second piece is an equity component. I think it's sort of a historical recognition of historical differences in health outcomes and healthcare access and things like that make it reasonable to immunize First Nations people first, right? So I think there's a risk factor there, and there's an equity piece. And I think when you take both of those things together, that's why First Nations people were in the first phase of the priority groups.
Yeah, I myself, when I had heard when the vaccine was first coming out in the priority list, I think we were third on the list besides on top with the like long-term care facilities and the more elderly people, and we were on the list as well. I know just from seeing on media and social media that it is really affecting minority groups, especially in the States, the Black people and the Latinos and whatever, that they are getting hardest hit, and the Native population over in the States as well. So I think that we are really fortunate that we were near the top of the list to be getting this vaccine in our, in all our First Nations communities. My opinion.
Yeah, no, fair, right? I mean, but I can understand where the question comes from too, right? Because I think that there's a lot of historical pieces that come up, and it's come up in the U.S. too, around different minority populations as well, right? And their history and their experience with the healthcare system, and so it's a good question.
Yeah, I think there's some mistrust there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, hopefully our conversation can help to do something about that.
I hope that people can, I know we still have some reluctance in our community, and I hope that this conversation that we've had will be able to help maybe change some people's minds, because I think that we are still continuing to take names for any future clinics. I think we did a total of 4 clinics where we opened it up to our community on and off reserve in Lambton County. But we are still taking names to try to get enough to do possibly another clinic, or on an as needed basis at the health center. Thank you.
Perfect. No, thank you. It's nice to meet you, Natalie.
Nice to meet you too.